There's a famous saying that goes, if you aren't a socialist when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a capitalist once you grow up, you don't have a brain. You'll see so-called former socialists say something along these lines pretty common, that as they grew older they became convinced that socialism doesn't work simply by looking at reality. Obviously that's bullshit, and I don't think I need to waste my time explaining why. Long story short though, whether consciously or subconsciously, there's always an underlying actual reason that they don't explicitly say for why they actually left the left. That is, if they ever openly admit that they left the left at all. Today we are going to explore the 5 main reasons people who once claimed to be left went right. Keep in mind, of course, that none of these ideas are exclusive. People could leave leftism for multiple of the reasons or all of the reasons I'm about to say, and often do, but leaving leftism ultimately does pretty much come down to these reasons. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it, and let me know if I'm missing any other major reasons for leaving socialism too. First of all though, if you'd like to support my channel, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a helpful comment, and also subscribe to my Patreon for early access to my videos, as well as exclusive access to videos that will never really be released on my actual channel, a unique role-in channel in the Discord, and other unique perks. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. First off are wreckers, people who are only part of a socialist movement specifically to damage that movement from the beginning. These could be people contracted to work from outside or just a lone wolf wrecker doing it for its own sake. These kinds of people will often start fights with other members and just generally find ways to embarrass the organization one way or another. One of the ways they stay long-term is that they can deceive people into thinking that they're just misguided, but that they ultimately mean well. They play off of people's goodwill and good faith to manipulate them into thinking that they can be changed for the better. Or they'll stay long-term by being more covert in their wrecking. They'll be informants, for example. Morris Childs was a CIA agent who made his way all the way up to vice president of the CPUSA. So this strategy can also be very effective. Then there is the socialism is when kinds of people. The types that have a conception of socialism that isn't really connected to reality. So they think socialism is just capitalism with universal healthcare and public transit, or socialism is just when I can have my own farm and cow and chickens and everyone else can fuck off, or socialism is when I get to kill all my enemies and bathe in their blood and burn down factories and destroy cities, or that socialism is literally when after the revolution there is absolutely zero hierarchy whatsoever instantly and that I can never have to work again and just play video games all day. Just generally being totally misguided about what socialism is. And then when these people realize that socialism isn't whatever idiotic nonsense they think it is, they will like to say that they grew out of socialism, so to speak, when what they're really growing out of it is just their incredibly dumb interpretation of what socialism is supposed to mean. One of my favorite examples of this is Dmitry Volkogonov, who says that he finally lost any belief in socialism when he found a quote of Lenin saying kulaks should be hung, basically. And the fact that he didn't know Lenin hated the kulaks, even though Lenin wrote about them a ton, even though that was one of the main campaigns of Lenin's life was dekulakization, shows just how little Volkogonov ever knew anything about Lenin. He also refers to socialism as a utopian system, which it's not. The whole point of Marxism was establishing socialism under scientific means. So just an absolutely classic example of the socialism is one type. Someone who has no clue what socialism is, and then touts how they were a former socialist afterwards when they never were a socialist. Socialism is when types and wreckers are a common combination. People like Infrared, who, quotes from people like Marx and Engels to argue that baristas are bourgeois, as an example. Then there's the people who joined socialism because they personally were poor, and not because they cared about humanity as a whole. So it came from their own selfish material conditions that they were socialists, and then once they became rich, they realized their class interests were no longer aligned with socialism but capitalism instead, and rather than staying as socialists anyways, they decided to instead advocate for the system that benefits them personally. I think the amount of people this happens to is overstated, and most young so-called socialists who end up becoming non-socialists when they get older were never really socialists. But material conditions do in many ways determine political beliefs, so it is possible for sure for a socialist to become rich and then no longer want to give up their class advantage once they're part of the bourgeois or the petty bourgeois, professional managerial class, whatever you want to call it. You can be a genuine socialist, but if you become rich, you can be corrupted by your advantageous material conditions into just becoming a social democrat or apolitical or whatever. Next, we have opportunists. People who basically just called themselves socialists in order to get girls, or to be popular, or to gain influence or money, but when it was no longer popular or cool, they left. Often they'll be happy to bring up how they're no longer socialists in order to get the same clout they once used to get by claiming they were once socialists. This of course has a bit of overlap with the previous idea of being socialist simply because you're poor. Or sometimes it'll just be that leftism offers a place of community that they didn't have, especially to very young people, but they're not in any way really interested in the politics or actually doing the reading or learning what socialism is, and it's mostly just the community that they want. And if it was a right-wing org that offered that community first, they might have chosen that instead. And of course, sometimes people will move right without openly saying they've moved right, especially if they have an economic interest in continuing to claim they're left, even though their politics have moved right over time. Lastly, we have the only reason that I really sympathize with, which is pessimism about the chances of socialism ever happening at all. Especially in America, this sheer resistance to socialism, not just in the government, but among the same people that are just supposed to be emancipated, is very depressing. The amount of shit you get from people who have no clue what they're talking about thanks to the endless decades of anti-communist propaganda feels insurmountable at times. Scientifically, factually, I believe Marxism-Leninism is the most utilitarian humanist philosophy there is. It, over time, would create the most happiness and health for people. But at the same time, I just find myself wondering whether it's possible to ever reach that, and whether the pain and annoyance of it all is worth it when it comes to these people who think that if you say these kinds of things, you're a red fascist, tanky authoritarian. This is where I feel like you'll often get people becoming social democrats, where they still want to help people, but they want to do it within the framework of the capitalist system. Or people who just leave politics altogether, who just say, fuck it, what's the point? Of course, the counter to all of this is that all socialist movements have always been fought against seemingly insurmountable odds. Look at Fidel Castro attacking Cuba on a single dingy boat, or Mao fleeing the nationalists by marching across the entirety of China with a small ragtag band of communists. Things seem impossible until they eventually actually happen, and I still do believe that socialism can and will happen. As Lenin famously wrote, there are decades where weeks happen, and there are weeks where decades happen. Anyways, yeah. If you hear someone saying they left socialism because they got a brain or they started reading, they're just lying. It's one of the aforementioned reasons I've already talked about, or more commonly, a mixture of them. Anyways, that's about all I have to say for this video. Remember to leave a like, helpful comment, and subscribe. And of course, also, if you want to financially support me, join my Patreon or the membership through my YouTube. Thank you also to my current patrons, Alexander Bernston, Citizen Smith, Comrade Gaffsey, Pybot5000, Professional Tanky, Richard Scott Wigton, and Shivru, as well as my YouTube members, KawaDW, YoohooTube, and Sparkle Squish. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.